Most people that fail tech sales interviews don't know why. And it's not because they lack experience. It's 5 specific mistakes that kill you before the interview is even half over. I'm an enterprise AE, and I've coached over 300 people into roles at companies like Snowflakes, Salesforce, Ramp, and DoorDash. And I see the same interviews, invisible mistakes over and over. So today I'm going to break down every single one of them and show you exactly how to fix them so you'll interview like someone who already has the offer in hand. Let's start at the beginning, literally the first 90 seconds of your interview. The first mistake that I see people make is that they don't start off to the races. Okay, they have a weak opening. And the majority of your interview will start with a version of the interview question, tell me about yourself. So a lot of people, what they do is really well represented in this meme is they just start rambling and they try to connect, they tell about themselves and talk about stuff that are some very often just irrelevant to the role, or they just like vomit again whatever's on their CV. What you actually want to be doing is you want to building out a narrative. You want to connect dots of the different points, that led you specifically to meet with this hiring manager and why it makes sense to meet with him now. And for that, I use a framework called the hero journey. And I'm going to give you an example of how you can productize that framework in a way that you answer, that tell me about yourself question and start on the right foot. Here's the word track. I am blah, blah, blah. I'm John. I think what sets me apart is my ability to create urgency and drive deals forward when others get stuck. Or you can say, what sets me apart is I'm entrepreneur driven, or my ownership mentality. I actually never planned on going into sales. My original path was XYZ, but I needed money and I landed a BDR role at this company. I was the new guy on the block and I was doing better than people that were there for years. And that's when I realized, sales is what I'm good at, what I like doing the most. So what you're doing first is you're setting out the stage in a way that is compelling. You refuse the adventure, the call to adventure, but then you stumbled and then you were good. And then you were like, maybe I should double down on it. The second step is like here, you want to, now that they're intrigued, okay, but this talent, this raw talent is you want to build out, like you want to prove your value. And for that, you want to stack some social proof and use some sales jargon. And here's an example of doing that. Since then, I worked at company one, whatever company where I spent X years selling product to this ICP, to this type of buying persona. My biggest wins include, you can name like one of the major logos maybe that you closed, the biggest headline number deal that you generated, the total revenue generated, whatever that is, a quota attainment, anyway. Now I'm looking for a place where I can stay put for the next 3 to 5 years and maximize my impact on the top line revenue of my employer, develop my skills, grow net worth, and increase my earning potential. I know I have what it takes to be a top performing AE, and I want to learn from the best. And that's what brought me here today with a smile in your voice. So why this works is basically, we start strong with a hook. Okay, we got a compelling story that gets them to lean in. Then we bulletproof ourselves by adopting the language and providing future points of reference that they can discuss, throughout the conversation, deals that we've closed, personas, etc. And not only that, but we also subtly talking about, we try to insert ourselves in the future vision that they have, for their career. And you want to basically just show that you're someone reliable that's going to be there with them in the future by just laying out, those 3 to 5 years timeline. Okay, you want to insert yourself into a future point. So this is a better framework. And the point is, like, if I had to just conclude that first mistake, something is like, you want to make it feel like meeting this sales hiring manager was meant to happen. Like it was almost faith and you connecting dots. And that's how you will essentially unlock this like positive bias for you. And that's how you nail essentially your opening. But here's the thing. I've seen people deliver a perfect, tell me about yourself and still get rejected 30 minutes later. The mistake number 2 is the reason why. And it's one of that costs people just the most money. So essentially, like we've seen before that your opening was dialed. Okay. The hiring manager is leaning in. Now they're going to do what every hiring manager does next, which is they're going to look at your numbers. And this is where mistakes 2 kills people silently. The second thing is like once that you build that narrative is you want to walk the talk. And this is done in 2 ways. The first is the numbers. The way that the hiring manager basically, when he looks at you, when he's in the room with you, is like, can you fit in the job that I have right now? And more precisely is like, can you handle the level of complexity that this will require? And complexity really just means a few things. It just means like, are you comfortable with an average deal deal size or an average sales cycle duration, because this is what dictates the level of complexity of a sales process. Sometimes it could be like 3K deals that close in 2 weeks. There's a typical type of sales professional that manage that. But those that manage, for example, like 6 figures, that take 6 months to close it is an entire different breed of sales professional. And you want to provide in advance, that the answer to that level of complexity that you're essentially comfortable with. So very early on in the sales call is you want to flesh those things out by just naming them up front, and then building on top of that by saying how many meetings you've generated, how many deals you've closed, how much revenue basically that equates to. And again, the whole idea is make it easy for the hiring manager in front of you to just qualify, okay? And he will give it back to you through positive question, and he will tell you if you're behind or if you have a concern, and we can have those real conversations. But if you keep this thing kind of blurry, you're not connecting. And if you're not connecting, get rejected. You're just going to nod, in the background, and you'll be out. So remember to just flesh out quickly like that level of complexity, okay? Oh yeah, and by the way, if you're watching this and thinking, I've been making half of those mistakes and I didn't even know it, that's exactly why I built the incubator. It is the full system, not just what you say, but how to get those interviews, how to get into those rooms in the first place, and how to walk out with the offer, okay? Links in the description if you want to take a look. Mistake 3 is what separates the real closer from the people who just memorize a script. And it's one of the most people think they're ready but really aren't. So at this stage, basically, like, you've got the story, you've got the numbers. Now, the hiring managers believe you've done it before, but believing and being convinced are two different things, okay? And this next part is the stress test. What they want to see is if you have actual experience to replicate your success, that you're not a one-time hit. And in order to qualify you for those things, they usually ask around 3 things, okay? It's like, 1 is how do you build pipeline? 2 is how do you control a deal cycle? How do you move a rep, from the first meeting all the way to signing a deal and paying you money? And 3 is like, how do you quarterback a team of cross-functional partners, okay? Whether that's finance, I'm talking about internal partners like finance, deal desk, maybe could be legal, could be like engineers. Anyway, how do you quarterback like your internal colleagues to get deals over the line? Because it's fine, you don't need to go into details here. If you're going for a BDR role, you can just talk about this. But if you're going for an account executive role, then you need to show that you can align people with competing priorities and work across functional partners to get things done. Because again, complexity is, I want to make sure as a hiring manager that you're comfortable doing those things, because this is what is required to win those deals. So you want to, again, just give social proof that you've done that, okay? And here's like a strong way to kind of go through this process. Is just like this framework. The first step is you want to just break down an example of a deal that you've closed and run it through every step of the process, okay? And you want to start off by saying, idea, like this wasn't an inbound, whatever lead you're going to walk them through. Like you identified a company as a high fit prospect using like a buying trigger, and you reached out multi-channel, you multi-threaded across the account at different stakeholders until you got to the right decision maker, you got an intro, and within 10 days, like you had a meeting with them. The idea here is like, we're talking about how do you stuff your pipeline. Here, what you want to touch on are really just 3 things. One is like, what specific trigger event or ICP match, like what did you do to kind of source that lead, to find them? So you want to touch on those things. Use buying trigger, use that word buying trigger, because they're going to appreciate that. Second is like, what type of outreach have you used? Did you cold call those people? Did you email those people? Did you use an intro through maybe like connection that you have? Did you write an executive memo for your director to reach out on your behalf and then pass on the lead to you? Like what outreach strategy have you used, and how fast did you convert that lead from 0 to basically setting up that meeting? Boom, that you've done. The second thing is basically cycle control. And what I mean by that is you want to show that you are proactive at basically moving the buyer through the different steps until he buys from you. And you're not just reactive. You're not just an order taker. And you want to essentially name out some of the internal, external stakeholder maybe that you've brought on the deal. You want to show how you created urgency, how you built a point of view, how you quantified the pain of your prospect, how you connected with a champion and equipped him or her to sell on your behalf internally. And how did you forecast, the deal throughout that cycle to your own hiring manager? And you want to be very vocal that, big deals like this type of deals, they don't happen in a vacuum. You're not alone, essentially. And that you need need like cross-functional partners again to make these things happen, which brings us to our third point, which is providing with an actual example of how you've done that. And I'm providing you with the word track here that you can read. The point is again, you want to just name out some of the key internal stakeholders. Could be engineers, could be finance or deal desk, could be your leader, like a director that you brought on a call, could be legal during the red line phases, like you use your own commercial counsel like to draft out the contract and work through the red lines. Anyways, I'm giving you like a bunch of names here that you can use. Then mention like how you cater to the prime metrics of those people, because you want to bring those people in a way that benefits them, okay, to remove friction. You want to align them. You want the way you ask them to help you should benefit them, and if that's not the case, they will not help you over the long term. So you want to basically just mention out a way that you've done that. For example, deal desk, like you came up with a proposal. What was the price you think you should sell at? You provide all the context about the accounts so they can model out the financials, make their work easy. This is just an example of doing that. Now, how did you anticipate problems before they happened? Like maybe like there was some kind of roadblock at some point. One of the decision maker you were dealing with like left the company or went on PTO, for 3 months. Like how did you fix that? How did you recoup that account? And anyways, you want to basically just close everything with a one-liner that fleshes out again how you've closed this thing. So remember, what I'm doing here is I'm giving you different ways. Okay, it's a toolbox that I'm giving you. It's not a word track. I want you to understand what are the things that must be included in your answer as you walk people through, a sales process. And if you do encapsulate those things, you will make it crystal clear, essentially, that you are the right hiring manager. And if you can walk the talk on your process, you're ahead of 80% of candidates. But the best hiring manager are just testing your skills, okay, or your process. They're testing also your composure, which is the mistake number 4, is the one actually that got me, even me personally. And once you see it for what it is, you'll never fall for it again. The mistake 4 is essentially like, at this point, you've built real credibility. That's exactly when a good hiring manager will try to rattle you, okay? And welcome to the shit test, which is here. And I have a way of feeling about shit test. Is like, first of all, you need to understand that hiring managers, as part of the hiring process, they want to stress test you. You want to make sure that you're not gonna, if someone throws you a curveball like a client or something, you're not gonna lose face and start crying and roll, So they might ask you some very open-ended question, and some of those questions aren't always like adversarial in the sense of like they're trying to be mean, but they just want to see like that question that sometimes when people ask them to you, they feel like they're asking you to just belly dance for them. Like that's how I see it. And some of those examples are like, tell me about a time a deal went sideways, like how did you fix it? Okay, they're like, no, okay, dance. That's how I feel. And for me, the way to regain control from the conversation is to clarify, like, what do you guys actually want to know about when you ask me this question? And you break it down into pieces and you ask them, okay, where should we start? What is important to you in this list of things? Okay. And I'm going to give you a couple examples that you can do that. One is, again, someone asks you to break down a deal. You say, I think that's a great question. And in my experience, when hiring managers like yourself ask me that, they're really looking for one of 5 things. Is that one is like how the deal was uncovered. 2 is how the right problem was quantified. 3 is how the rep multi-threaded across the account. 4, how he leveraged his internal team and cross-functional partners. 5 is what were the biggest roadblock to the deal and what was done to overcome those. Like, which one of these we're hoping that we tackle first? You don't have to say them all 5, but I wanted to just lay them out to give you optionality on which one you want to pick. Another example is like, you don't have X years of sales experience. You only have 3 and you're applying for a role that has 5. And someone calls you out on this. Well, you can follow up by saying, well, thanks for addressing the elephant in the room. When hiring managers like yourself raise concern again about sales experience, they're really worried about one or 2 things. One is someone that will take forever to hit the ground running and will require a lot of maintenance. Or 2, someone that will crumble under rejection and quit. Which one is it in this case? So remember, to regain control of the conversation, you clarify. And anytime you feel like someone wants you to just belly dance for them, you're not going to start talking until you're clarifying what the fuck it is that they really want. So now you can handle the pressure. There's one last mistake, and honestly, this is the one that separates good reps from the ones who actually get offers. And it's counterintuitive. And most interview coaches will never even tell you this. If you made it really this far, and this one is about working through the negative. The mistake is about asking the difficult questions. We don't sell by selling the positives. No one sells with benefits. But the way we do this is by calling out what are the reasons we shouldn't work together, and then kind of getting the prospect to kind of admit that, to fight, for these own reasons on their own. That's kind of how I look at it at sales. And I even wrote this tweet recently to walk you through it. And here's how I would do it. One way, imagine like during the interview, like you come and you approach the hiring manager and say like, soften a bit the conversation and ask a difficult question. They'll be like, sure. And you can follow up with, in my experience, there's typically a roster of internal candidates competing for this role. Why choose an external candidate over someone who's already versed on the product? And you stop talking, you shut up. And what this question does is that it's true. Like, there's most likely someone that is wanting this role. And let's have that hard conversation, like why you're focusing on external hires, because this will give you pointers in terms of like what that hiring manager is looking for. And then you can tie those things back to you. And if they're not fighting for you, if they're totally dismissing you and being like, well, you're right, I'm actually locked on someone, then you shouldn't be wasting your time because they already have like a positive bias for someone else. And they're just going through the process because they have to. They have to interview a few people, but the reality is they're already locked on a different name. At least you get the truth of it. You get to the truth. That's all matters. And I invite you to, again, always, through all your deals, like just take a piece of paper, write down the reason the prospect should work with you, the reason he should not. Prospect can be replaced with anything, a hiring manager, a client, a friend, whatever it is. Then come up with questions that gets them to work through the negatives on their own. All right, so we're almost done. The last thing that I wanted to give you is just like a bonus, a closing question that you can use at the end. I'm not going to walk you through it, but I'll invite you to just pause. And I think it's quite juicy, to use it. Typically when the hiring manager asks you at the end, like, do you have any questions for me? This is a great way to finish on a high note. So again, to recap, here's the big picture, okay? These 5 mistakes, okay, they aren't random. They map to exactly how a hiring manager evaluates you in real time. First, they're deciding if they like you. Second, they're checking if you can do the job. And this is where they check basically your numbers and then your process. 4 is they're stress testing you if you're real. Okay, that's the shit test part. And finally, they're deciding if you're the one. And that's where you close. If you understand this sequence, you're not just prepping for interviews, you're running them. You're controlling the arc, essentially. And that's the difference between someone who hopes, they get an offer and someone who expects one. Now you've got the 5 mistakes and the frameworks to fix each one. That puts you ahead of most candidates already. But I'll be honest with you, okay? Knowing the playbook and running it in your specific and unique situations are 2 different things, okay? What roles and companies should you actually be targeting in 2026 to make the most money while working the least for it? How do you stand out against people with more experience at better companies? What if you've got gaps, like a layoff or short tenures, or you're making a jump, that doesn't look obvious on paper? That's what the incubator is for. We've helped people like Michael, who felt stuck in manufacturing sales and is now at 210K at one of the fastest growing companies in the world. We also got Audrey, who used to be buried in a very niche and small startup and transitioned into snowflakes in the span of 6 weeks. We even got people that didn't have any sales experience before, like Justin, who used to be a customer support agent, or Abe, who used to be an engineer, and are both respectively, now at Main10X and Rippling. So if you're actively interviewing, okay, or about to start, links in the description, okay? We'll get on a quick call. I'll tell you straight up if I can help. And if I can't, I'll point you in the right direction. No pressure. Drop your questions in the comments. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one.